Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Manager of Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's DM Radio, Transform the Information Economy Demands Agility, sponsored today by Magnitude. It is a deep dive and continuing conversation from a live DM Radio broadcast a few weeks ago, which if you missed, you can listen to it on demand at dmradio.biz under podcasts. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just click the chat icon in the bottom middle of your screen for that feature. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Or if you'd like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag DMRadio. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of the session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now let me turn the webinar over to Eric Kavanagh, the host of DM Radio, to introduce today's webinar and speakers. Eric, hello and welcome.
Hello and welcome indeed. Thank you, folks, for your time and attention today. Big thanks to our friends from Magnitude and, of course, to all of our friends from Dataversity. Yes, indeed, transform the information economy demands agility. Yes, it does. We're going to try to be agile today. Yours truly, and Tony Fisher, one of my good buddies from the industry, one of the veterans out there, and Craig Chaplin from Magnitude Software. You might recall Tony from his days at Dataflux, and then, of course, Zaloni. Now he's over there running the show for Simba Technology and all about connectivity, connecting data to other systems, to applications. We're going to learn all about that stuff today. And Craig Chaplin, Senior Product Manager at Magnitude Software. I thought today, what can we discuss to really put this all in context? Well, you probably heard this concept, the future of work. Well, the World Economic Forum put out this future jobs report in 2018. In the last year, all of a sudden, I know like 15 people who go to the World Economic Forum. So things are happening in rapid fashion. But there's a lot of interesting material in this, and some of it may not be too far from what you expected. But look at some of these numbers. So this is technologies by proportion of companies likely to adopt them by 2022. Look at the top one, user and entity big data analytics, 85%. What's the next one? App and web-enabled markets, 75%. Those top two, think about how much information is going to be shared with all those technologies. So big data analytics is everywhere now. Big data is a commonly used word. It's a household name, if you will. And apps, think of all the apps that are out there. Well, if you go down this list, there are all these other categories, but those two on top are really very powerful. So analytics, well, what does machine learning do? Machine learning will learn from lots and lots of data. So we've heard about the Facebook and the LinkedIn overlords trying to change the world, getting all actively involved in various things. There's a ton of data out there. There's an absolute mountain of data which is being used in all kinds of different ways. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But the point is there's a tremendous amount of information flying around out there. Internet of Things, IoT, devices, the refrigerators that have IoT sensors in them. We've got sensors all over the place these days. I've been talking to a company called Keyence. They make little sensors themselves. They're a manufacturing company. They've been running their entire business through an AI engine for 15 years now. They're just now going public with that information. This is one of the most well-known companies in the world in terms of manufacturing these sensors. They're all over the place. Well, there's data spinning out of all these different environments. So you see machine learning is listed number 4, cloud, computing, all this stuff. This all requires data. That's the one thing they all have in common. All of these new jobs require data. So what does that mean? Well, let's just think about apps. I looked up today just to see how many apps are out there, whether it's for the Google Play or Apple Store or whatever the case may be. And look at these numbers, 2.1 million apps in the Google Play Store, 2.1 million across this spectrum. We've got, 2.1 and 1.8. That's almost 4 million right there. We're closing in on 5 million apps. Think about that. All those apps require data. All those apps have interfaces. All those apps are interfacing with other kinds of applications, with other information systems, et cetera. This is an astonishing number, and this shows you how much technology there is flying around out there these days that uses data. So without the data, none of these apps are useful at all. There's a tremendous amount of data being gathered all the time. So think about just when your app asks you, oh, this app would like to know where you are, when you're using the app, never, all the time, whatever the case may be. Lots of these folks are gathering tremendous amounts of data. We're starting to see some pushback from all that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is a massive number to indicate just how prevalent data is in our economy today. A lot of people call it the new oil. I like the new currency. That's a term I've heard recently folks use to describe data. It's the new currency, because with the right data at the right time, you can make the right decision. You can buy the right product. You can provide the right service. You can keep your customers happy. You know, a lot of times in our industry, in my industry, which is kind of spun out of the data warehousing space, analytics, business intelligence, all that fun stuff, that's on the analytical side. That's not so much on the operational side, but we're starting to see that. And if you look at some of the other big trends we just saw, like machine learning, that's heavily on the operational side. So what you're actually seeing, chatbots is something else that really rely on data. Now, some would argue those came out a bit too early, a bit prematurely, and they weren't quite ready for prime time. But now we have companies like Recast.ai that just got bought by SAP. I took a detailed demo of that, and it is very powerful, because what they're doing is they're combining natural language processing with workflow and, wait for it, data to be able to have these chatbots handle all kinds of basic stuff for you. Like if your computer breaks, you can reorder a computer just through a chatbot, and people can train the chatbots to learn over time more and more complex situations. So more than 80% of calls to customer service are typically really simple stuff, especially if you're in like a large organization. You call ServiceNow or whatever the case may be. Most of that stuff is really mundane, and a chatbot can do it just fine. So what does that mean? Well, it means that customer service job is going to be a little bit different, isn't it? Now, the threat that we keep hearing about, the danger zone, if you will, is that, oh, these machines are going to take our jobs away. I would argue by far, more than anything, AI and these machine learning algorithms and the machines themselves are going to take away the really boring, tedious jobs that nobody wanted to do anyway. Just look at car manufacturing. The robots that build cars, well, the jobs that people had before that when we built cars were pretty boring and pretty dangerous and relatively error-prone. So let's think about this. This is also from the report, Ratio of Human-Machine Working Hours, 2018 versus 2022. Look at some of the interesting trends that we see here. So reasoning and decision-making. Well, humans, guess what? We're still going to do a whole lot more of that. Coordinating, developing, managing, and advising, etc. Still a lot of human activity. It's going down a little bit if you look at the machines. Communicating, interacting, again, it's going up and up and up on the right-hand side here for what the machines are going to be doing. But again, it's kind of the boring stuff. So at the bottom, you see information and data processing. Well, what do we say for like data scientists, right? We say they spend 80% of their time just gathering data, trying to process data, get data in the right shape, so on and so forth. That will increasingly be done by machines, which is good news because that's the boring part of the job. So looking for and receiving job-related information. Once again, the machines are kind of climbing up there. I've heard some really interesting companies lately doing stuff, again, using data, but using all kinds of new data sets, including spoken word. Natural language processing is really moving along these days. There's a company we had on one of our shows, VoiceBase, where what they do is they collect information, kind of like you get a call for a polling, and if it's a robocall, it's not a person asking you the questions, it's just a computer asking you the questions. They say that people are more willing to give opinions to computers than they are to people, which is kind of funny. But more and more you're going to be able to leverage that stuff, and that's more data that you can use. Yeah, it's unstructured data, but it's still data nonetheless, and you can use it to make better decisions for your organization. So let's hope this is not the future of work. This was a pretty funny story that came out. That is a patent that Amazon applied for. It's a cage, basically, and the human being goes inside the cage and uses the arm to go grab stuff and just kind of monitors what the robot is doing. And you can see the story got out there by the Seattle Times, and Dave Clark writes, sometimes even bad ideas are submitted for patents. This was never used, and we have no plans for usage. We developed a far better solution, which is a small vest associates can wear, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that Amazon caught some flack for this. But, you know, that's a reality. Human meets machine, right? Is that what's going to come down the pike? I hope not. I certainly don't think so. Amazon already took some flack for that. But then let's take a look at this. So what are the strategies to address shifting skills needs by proportion of companies? So look at this. Hire new permanent staff with relevant skills to new technology. That's one thing to do. Look to automate the work, retrain existing employees, and it kind of goes down from there. Strategic redundancies of staff who lack the skills to use technologies. Ooh, we don't want to see that. But things are changing. You know, I heard a great quote at a conference in Orange County late last year, and we were talking about moving to the cloud and moving to an in-memory architecture, all this ERP stuff, enterprise resource planning, which again relies on tons and tons of data, right, that people have to use. And there was a guy who had a great quote to really have a clarion call, if you will, to what's happening in the world today and the future of work and the present of work. And he was talking about people who have been really good at working with other people and solving problems the old-fashioned way. We've always had problems with technology, with data, with systems, et cetera. We've always had those issues to deal with. But he was talking about how much of a sea change is underway right now. He's talking about digital transformation. We're talking about the people side right now. We're going to talk about process and technology and the rest of this event, of this webinar. But he had this great quote. He referred to that person who has always done a great job, who has been the hero of the company, and he said, "I am the hero of yesterday. Where do I fit in this new world?" Wow, what a powerful quote, right? Because there are some people who really just are not systems-oriented. They're not systems-focused. They're not really data people. They're people. Well, guess what? Those jobs are never going to go away, I can promise you. So I found this just to be entertaining here. Amazon reportedly employs thousands of people to listen to your Alexa conversations. Well, maybe you've heard about the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. This is a version of GDPR, if you will. It's a slight change from the GDPR regime that's coming out of the EU, the General Data Protection Regulation. I point this out, folks, because, again, this deals with data, with the privacy of data, and also to point out the dichotomous world that we're living in these days, because there are divergent forces right now moving in the data space. On the one hand, we've got tremendous amounts of information in Facebook and LinkedIn, but all over the place. Every company out there that captures information about consumers, well, we want to know, what do people want? What are they going to do? How can I optimize my app to serve them with data about them? Well, in the West, here in America, it's still kind of the Wild West. We can still pretty much do whatever we want. But the CCPA comes along, and guess what? Now you really kind of can't. But this is a very strange world to live in, because all of a sudden we have all this data, and you can recognize, by the way, effects of GDPR anytime you browse on the web. You get these warnings. Oh, this site uses cookies. Are you okay with it? Yes, I'm okay with that. I actually just had a very up-close and personal look at GDPR. I was trying to book a whole bunch of travel. I said, you know what? I should just call a travel agency, because they actually do that stuff. There's still travel agents out there, and they get good deals. And I was talking to her just yesterday saying, hey, can you help me book these flights? She said, yes, of course. I said, now can you also use my reward miles to book the flights? And she said, well, no, we can't, because now all the airlines want to make sure it's you for privacy reasons. I'm like, well, can't I tell you or tell them to tell you that it's okay? And the short answer is no. So some of these regulations that are coming along are already extant, and they're really kind of making life harder. I don't want to have to do all that stuff myself. But the point is that data is still the fuel of all this stuff, and I just had to laugh. CCPA, I'm like, wait a minute, CCCP? I have been to various places in Russia. I know how to speak Russian. I think the Russians get a bad rap these days, personally. But the point is that data is everywhere. Data is driving all these applications. Data is the fuel. And quite frankly, since you're on this webinar, I think you're going to be just fine. So one last slide here, I believe, preferred partners in managing the integration of new technologies and workforce transition. Outsourcing, anyone? How much outsourcing goes on these days? And that's not just India and China anymore. All of Eastern Europe is involved in this. Countries all over the world. Guess what? If you can program from anywhere, if you can do customer service from anywhere, this is something to keep in mind. So digital transformation is going to move jobs, and I would argue it's going to be good news for us on the call here, because we're smart people and we're trying to do the right thing. So digital transformation for us is probably going to result in us doing more interesting things. But just be advised that whatever job you're doing, if it could be done by a computer and a phone, it could be done by a computer and a phone anywhere. So this is all very real. Digital transformation is happening right now. It's affecting all of us, and I would encourage all of you to take that very, very seriously. And with that, I'm going to hand the keys over to Tony Fisher, who can share with us what's going on with Magnitude and connectivity. And folks, this is so exciting because I've known about Simba Technologies for a number of years, and they're the guys who designed ODBC and JDBC. Remember all those technologies? They're still out there. What you're going to hear from Tony and Craig is there's a whole new way of connecting information systems, connecting databases to applications, and it's really powerful stuff. So with that, Tony Fisher, I'm handing it off to you.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, way to build the case. Exactly what you were talking about is what we're going to talk about today. We really are going to explore how data is really at the heart of digital transformation. And then we're going to dig even deeper and see how digital transformation is at the heart of the information economy. So we're really going to dig into these ideas. One of the things that Eric said that's absolutely true, though, is that the evolving application environment that we are in the middle of, it will derail our efforts to transform our organization if we don't acknowledge the critical role of data in that transformation. So we're going to look deeply into data and the way that it is driving the information economy. And we will ultimately, well, specifically my colleague Craig Chaplin, will look at technologies available to help you embrace the transformation in these evolving environments. So with that, let's get started. And we're going to start with talking a little bit. Yep, that's good, Craig. So let's get started. The information economy is really a byproduct of digital transformation and the digital age. You know, you hear people say now that if you haven't embraced digital transformation, it's too late. We've already moved on past that. If you listen to some of the pundits, they'll say things like, hey, we're in the experience age now, or the knowledge age, or the innovation age, or the collaboration age. But really, these are just evolutions of the digital age. They're byproducts of the digital age. So the digital age is going to continue to evolve, and they're all going to continue to drive the information economy. I mean, one of the things we can't forget is that it was 50 years from the time that the Faraday machine was created to generate electricity to when we actually had commercial power. And that sort of ushered in a second industrial revolution. So we're going to continue to see this evolution of the digital age. So the information economy is characterized by informational activities instead of industrial activities, and this is all made possible by data, and this is all made possible by the digital transformation. So really, in order to embrace the information economy, we have to embrace digital transformation. So let's look a bit at how the information economy is really reshaping business. Okay, so I said already, you know, you may not be too late for digital transformation, but you can't ignore it. Really, the future success of your business depends on your ability to adapt to this information economy and this digital transformation. So there's no shortage of examples of companies that ignored the impact of the digital age. Let's back up one, Greg, and we're left out of the information economy. But perhaps none of these are as telling as Kodak. You guys all know Kodak. In the 70s, Kodak owned 85% of the camera market, and they owned 90% of the film market. In the 90s, Kodak was a $16 billion company. During this period, Kodak invented the digital camera. In 2012, Kodak declared bankruptcy. So what went wrong? Here is a company that's the top of their market that developed a digital camera. Well, they didn't want digital to disrupt their current business model, their current film and film camera market. They sold the rights of their digital camera to Apple, and they were unable to embrace this business model change based on digital content instead of on film. A classic example, an early example of how if you can't embrace digital in the data age, you can't continue to move your company forward. So now on the next slide, since Craig's jumping ahead a little bit, let's do a look at some of the companies that are embracing this. And these digital transformations, the digital transformation is a great disruptor. I mean, some of these companies have disrupted existing businesses, and some of them have created new business models based on the digital age. So just looking at a few of these, in the automobile industry, a very, very mature industry for a long time, we see companies like Uber and Zipcar that are utilizing the digital age to create new businesses based on the very mature automotive industry. And they're driving this through the services and service industry. Tesla is using digital transformation to improve the automobile experience, the driving experience, the maintenance experience. These companies are embracing digital as the way to develop their business models. If you look at companies like Spotify and Netflix and Philips, these companies are thriving using digital assets to create an economy based on renting things instead of owning them. So they rent everything from media in the case of Spotify and Netflix, all the way to light in the instance of Philips. So embracing new business models. And then kind of also related are big companies that have been around for a long time, Caterpillar, GE, Eaton, and these companies are using digital transformation to change their business models. They're collecting enormous amounts of information from very expensive capital infrastructure, and they're providing just-in-time maintenance to ensure what's going on is correct, and they can have continuous uptime for these assets. So if you think about it, none of these ventures would have existed just a few short years ago. And these are examples of evolution of the information economy. These are examples of how digital transformation has helped these companies either change their business model or enter into new business models, all based on data and the impact that data has in transforming their business. So let's keep going. Let's look at what's driving the digital transformation. So if we look on the next slide, we'll see that digital transformation is really a perfect storm of technology, innovation, and agile business processes. So these two things are driving digital transformation. Now, what's not immediately clear, though, is if it's the technology innovation driving the new business models, or if it's the new business models driving the technology innovation, or some combination of both. But let's look a little bit closer at both these technology innovations and these business model changes. If we look on the next slide, we'll see a definition of digital transformation. Gartner defines it as the process of exploiting digital technologies and supporting capabilities to create a robust new digital business. Now, this is important, but one of the things we can't forget is that the digital age and digital transformation is based on data. This is based on ones and zeros. These bits make up our data. So truly at the heart of this digital age and the heart of this information economy is your data. So looking a little bit closer at the driving forces, we'll dig in on the next slide to both the technologies and the business model transformation. And the technologies, Eric already hit a couple of these, or hit a few of these and talked about them. The information economy is a combination of your ability to embrace both of these. On the technology side, we see social media and we see IoT generating massive amounts of data. We see analytics and machine learning consuming massive amounts of data. Cloud computing is providing a ubiquity of applications, a proliferation of applications, and then cloud and mobile are helping us connect more directly with our consumers and with our customers. And this is just a constant increase of data production and data consumption. So businesses are using these technologies to drive fundamental business model changes. There's a huge emphasis now on customer experience and providing more direct customer experience and expanding the services associated with your customers. Collaboration and agility are allowing organizations to work much more effectively and efficiently. And we have a level of transparency and compliance now that we've never had before. And again, it's these business model changes that are driving the technology, and it's the technology that's driving these business model changes. But the result of this is really the transformation of our economy. So, kind of to put this all in perspective and to shine a spotlight on it, IDC, one of the leading analyst firms now, estimates that 10% of all corporate revenue is spent on digital transformation. So this is just a massive spend in organizations today as they're undergoing this digital transformation. So what does this look like in the real world? So if we look at the next slide, we'll see a little bit about how it's impacting your world today. One of the things that's happening in businesses that's interesting is that the businesses are pursuing an application-first mentality. So basically, they want to find an application that is going to solve their business needs. And this is just causing a proliferation of applications. The average number of enterprise applications in an organization is 508. And there are some organizations that have thousands. And this kind of application-first mentality is creating that is driving organizations to look at software as a service applications, and 87% of organizations today have multi-cloud environments. They are finding the application that best fits their needs wherever it is. And 69% of organizations say that the data that these applications are generating are their most valuable corporate asset. So this is creating just a massive infinite cycle of applications leading to a proliferation of infrastructure, leading to a proliferation of data, leading to changes in the business model, leading to more applications. And we see this going on and on. And this is the thing that we have to get our handle on in order to really embark on this digital transformation. So on the next slide, we see, what is the impact of this? Well, one of the things that's happening is that even though we're generating massive amounts of data, we're kind of in a data desert. We're application rich and data poor because we're not able to integrate and consolidate the data across the organization at the pace that is required to transform our business. So it's a story of the have and have-nots. We have the data we need, and then there's those that don't have the data that they need. And there are a lot more have-nots than there are haves now. And what we're trying to do at Magnitude, and what Craig is going to talk to you about in just a few minutes, is how to use technology to make sure that you get the data that you need. I mean, the business is clamoring for a better customer experience and a more agile organization. And this is really leading to a necessity for more and more data from more and more applications, and it's becoming increasingly more expensive and increasingly more difficult to manage that data and to consolidate that data. And at the pace that things are changing, we can't continue to move forward that way. So on my final slide here, it's just to show you a little bit about the way things have been and are today, and where we are evolving, and it's really pretty simple. I mean, today there's a lot of business users that are using a lot of applications, and then there's a need for the data from those applications to get to the business users, but it's not easy. And historically, IT has been kind of the gatekeeper of how to get data from applications into the business user. Well, what we have to do in order to really embrace the digital age and digital transformation is we have to break down that gate. We have to ungate our data. And that's really a lot of what's going on with the technologies that we're building today at Magnitude. We really want to provide just-in-time data so that when the business user and when the business needs the data, it's available for them to access that data. And that's kind of the bottom of this slide, is really pursuing an environment where just-in-time data is a reality. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Craig, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about technology that can be used to achieve this beautiful world of tomorrow. So Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So we've heard a lot about data, and so fundamentally data connectivity is going to be one of the key enablers of any sort of digital transformation that's occurring. it's really what facilitates getting data into and out of the applications that are powering these new business models that Tony and Eric have talked about. So when we think about sort of the number of applications, the amount of data, the different types of data out there, it's really clear that a standards-based solution is what's going to allow us the greatest amount of interoperability with these applications, and it's going to be what enables us to extract the data in a way that's easily visualized and ultimately understood so that we can use it for critical decision making. So fortunately, we're not starting from scratch. We actually have some existing standards and paradigms that we can continue to use to achieve this. So for example, when we're looking at trying to represent data, one very common way of doing that we've been using for decades is just in a relational format. We have a whole ecosystem of tools and applications that have been built up that have been created to address data in this format. So you think of the visualization tools, the BI tools, ETL tools, for example, all are used to working with data in this sort of format. Now, of course, it's not the only type of format that data exists in, but it's certainly by far one of the most common ones. Equally, the SQL query language is one such tool that allows us to, in a standardized way, to query data in this manner. Interestingly, I came across on a survey that Stack Overflow does, which is a website, a community website that developers use a lot for doing engineering and programming. But they did a survey on sort of languages that the most popular languages people are using. And even after all these years, SQL is still number 4 behind CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. And this was in a 2018 survey. So even though it's been out for decades, it's still one of the most popular languages that people have the skills to use. So the other thing that I mentioned, we're not starting from scratch, and interestingly enough, Simba worked on a API to standardize interfaces. So Eric mentioned this earlier in the introduction. So Simba was involved with Microsoft in the 1990s building this what was called ODBC. And this was an open database connectivity API that allowed applications to communicate with data sources in a common format. So you didn't have to worry about an application like Excel trying to figure out how to communicate with Oracle, how to communicate with SQL Server, DB2, all of which who had different APIs to interface with their data. So Simba and Microsoft worked on this standard that has now enabled us to continue and build drivers based on this standard. So you see a sampling of those on the slide in front. JDBC, which is a close cousin of ODBC, was created afterwards to address this from a Java perspective as well. So the coverage, though, although we started off with drivers that were kind of very focused on the traditional relational sources such as Oracle or DB2, for example, we've really seen an evolution of how people are storing data and, of course, where people are storing data. So we've seen big data come into play where we're dealing with vast amounts of data in different structures. We're looking at NoSQL databases, so people storing data in unstructured or semi-structured formats. And as well, of course, more recently, a lot of the cloud applications are needing to be addressed. And for those sources where we don't actually provide a driver, so this is just a small sampling that I have on the screen here, but if there are sources out there that we haven't hit yet, we also provide an SDK that allows you to easily build these drivers as well. So, and it's the same SDK software development kit that we use to build our own drivers. So just touching on, why look at Simba's drivers at all? Well, I could say, that they're used by many of the leading analytics and ETL vendors. They bundle our drivers with their products to access many of these data sources. I could say it's because we have dedicated test suites that target all the most popular applications that people are using. But I think one thing that we often forget about is, it's one thing to come out with some software that interfaces with an application or a data source, but we often forget that data source is constantly evolving as well. So we have, very mature sources such as Oracle, for example, that evolve slowly over time in terms of introducing new features and capabilities. So those aren't changing too often, but we have on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have some of these open source data sources that are rapidly evolving. They're getting new features added to them. We also have cloud-based data sources, such as, say, Salesforce, for example, which, because of the very model of how they're deployed, it makes it easier for them to push out updates and changes and enhancements to their application. So it's important for us to make sure that we stay on top of those applications and make sure that we iterate our driver along with them to make sure that you can still take advantage of all those features that are coming out. So it's not enough to just do a driver and move on. We need to actually come back to it and make sure that we constantly maintain that and push out those updates. And I'll come back to sort of the whole maintainability aspect of this in a few slides. In terms of where we actually deploy this type of software for connecting to data, well, there's really kind of two different sort of deployment patterns that can be used here. One is where you connect to these data sources using our drivers and pull it into something like a data warehouse or a data lake. So you're consolidating data from all of these sources of applications that your business is transforming to, putting it all in one place for access. The other option is to access the data in real time, so access it in place. So using tools like an ETL or a BI tool, an analytic tool, for example. So as with most technology and choices, they both have advantages and disadvantages. For some scenarios, when we're looking at some of the data volumes that we're dealing with these days, it's not really practical to be moving data, from one place to another. So trying to store it in a data warehouse, for example. In some cases, we want to be able to access that data in place in real time. There's also, a good case to be made to put data into a data warehouse. A lot of the cloud application vendors have licensing models that charge you based on per API use, right? So how many times do you interact with that cloud application? Well, if you roll out data access to all your users to access, say, Salesforce or Marketo, for example, are you going to start to run into some very costly charges for people trying to query that data? So a better model for your use case might be to actually pull that data out once into a data warehouse, data lake, etc., and then have users access that. So like I said, there's advantages and disadvantages, and it kind of depends on the sources you're connecting to and also the workflows that you're looking at. So we could stop there and just say, okay, here's a set of drivers. They give you access to all the tables and fields for all these different data sources, whether they're NoSQL or cloud applications. But that's not really enough, right? I mean, when we look at the data access standards, that certainly allows us to get to the data easily, but they do nothing to actually simplify the data for users. And this is really an area that we need to do better at, because we've seen incredible changes and progress made in applications for, say, visualization, BI tools. If you compare a BI tool from, say, the early 2000s to some of the BI tools and visualization tools that are available today, you can really see how they've really been tailored to make it easy for every user to start to create those visualizations, to start to be able to query that data. But what they don't do a great job of yet is really trying to figure out how can we simplify that data. So one of the things that for some of the data sources that Simba has drivers for, we actually introduce the concept of business view at the driver level. So rather than only just providing you a set of tables, we actually provide you a business view of that data. So why is that important? Well, if you look at something like, say, an ERP source, you could be dealing with tens of thousands of tables. They're notorious for the number of tables and the complexity of the relationships between those tables. So trying to put that into the average user's hands and saying, okay, out of these 20,000 tables, figure out which ones you need to do, an order request, report. It's not really practical. So what we've done with some of our drivers is we've actually put done the joining and the selection of the tables under the covers. So for the end user, all they see is, here's my open opportunities view of the data. And that includes all the tables, all the views related to the data for that particular business case. And so this is done at the driver level, which has the advantage of making that available to any application that is connecting to it. So you're not dependent on any sort of semantic layer that's been defined for one particular BI application, for example. So we've got two sets of driver. We've got two sort of, we solved the data access problem with a set of drivers that are standards-based. We've simplified some of the data access for some sources through the business use case, but we really haven't solved the problem of what do we do with all these sources. So I talked about earlier how many of these sources are evolving quickly and so are constantly being updated. So how do we make it easier for the IT folks to be able to push out these updates in a timely manner to their users? IT does not want to be the bottleneck in a business. So one of the things that we've done recently is introduced a product called Magnitude Gateway. And this is a centrally managed data connectivity platform in which we can deploy all the data source access components in one central place. And then for the applications needing to access that data, they only have to use one driver now, either one ODBC driver or one JDBC driver. So rather than deploying, half a dozen different drivers to a workstation for someone to connect to their data in Excel, we deploy one driver to the workstation that connects to this central platform, which can then connect to any number of data sources that IT has provisioned. So the obvious advantage here, of course, is that you're not having to touch everyone's workstation every time, say, Salesforce releases a new release of their API. The adapter gets updated in one place centrally, and users automatically benefit from that right away. The other thing that's important here is that, although it's important to be able to provide that connectivity to data sources, the other thing IT is being asked to do is to sort of govern, introduce the data governance of those data sources. So to have the control over who can access what, and also equally to understand who has accessed what. So being able to provide that audit trail. And having this in a centralized platform such as this allows us to actually have that information at a level that's not application dependent. So it doesn't matter whether you're connecting to the data through Excel or using an ETL tool to pull data out. All of that is captured at a data connectivity level and tracked there. So we talked about things like CCPA and GDPR earlier in terms of privacy. So all of these things are becoming much more critical than they have in the past, and ignoring them has become much more expensive than it has in the past as well. So just to summarize why a data connectivity platform, well, it's really sort of the anchor for your digital transformation. It's sort of the centralized place where we can actually deploy these new data sources. So as your business transforms more and more to digital assets, using these new applications, getting this new data, it's easy to provision access to those applications from a data connectivity standpoint. You don't have to worry about spinning up a lengthy or costly deployment project to do so. And then just to reiterate again, the importance of making sure that we can stay up to date, with these evolving data sources, especially the cloud applications ones. So being able to, for a low cost, be able to update your users to make sure they're always using the latest and greatest versions. The other thing that benefits sort of having a centralized connectivity platform is being able to define those connection profiles. So making sure that IT can easily provision for users all the information that's needed for a set of users to connect to Salesforce, for example, or a corporate Oracle deployment, for example. All of those things can be deployed in one place and managed by IT. Even better is that creation of those profiles no longer kind of relies on the the 1990s version of dialogues that we have in ODBC drivers natively. It's all done through a user-friendly modern interface. And then finally, as I mentioned, being able to really understand and govern that data access, so understand and control who can access the data and who has access to data. So at Magnitude and Simba, our data connectivity is foundational to everything we do. But we don't just stop there. So we've built this connectivity to these data sources. We've allowed other applications to access them as well. But Magnitude also delivers our own set of solutions on top of that connectivity. So whether it's reporting and analytics-based solutions, master data management, product information management, all of these are key to the digital transformation and really sort of taking the data and adding additional value on top of that. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Eric, I think.
Okay, good. We got a couple of good questions from the audience, but folks, don't be shy. Craig, I'll throw one over to you, and maybe Tony, if you want to chime in. What I think is kind of interesting here is that ODBC and JDBC have kind of been the unsung heroes of the information age, and it's just interesting to me that it's taken a while now for other companies to figure out how important this is. It's the foundation of the information economy. So I think it's very exciting what you folks have done by really focusing on that foundational level of data management. Are you guys kind of surprised that there aren't other companies trying to do the same thing that you're doing?
I'll take that first, I guess, and Tony, you can add to it if you want. So I think it's become much more of a I don't want to say problem, but it's certainly become much more of an issue where it used to be that companies were deploying a small number of data sources. They didn't really have to manage a large number of data sources, and they were all on premise. Whereas nowadays we're having to deal with not only the on-premise deployments, sort of those legacy corporate databases and data sources, but we're introducing those other cloud-based applications as well. So now companies are really having to deal with a multitude of sources to connect to, and once you start to introduce a lot of different types of sources, it's natural to try and figure out, is there a way to standardize on this? And sort of ODBC and JDBC is definitely a technology that can use that, but being able to manage that technology is still something that needs to be addressed, and that's where the Magnitude Gateway platform comes in.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, the other thing is, as Craig was saying earlier, there are so many different data sources, and all these different data sources are different. So in order to do what we do, you kind of have to be an expert in big data and in NoSQL and relational and API-based data interfaces. And it really is a fairly awesome infrastructure that has to be put together just to support the things that we do. Yeah, I mean, I guess there is a bit of a surprise that there aren't more people doing it. But at the end of the day, it requires a level of expertise that most companies just don't want to invest in.
Right. Well, and thinking about, again, all of these new applications, we talked about 4+ million apps in these various app stores, which to me is just a mind-blowing number. And Tony, to your point, there are so many new data sources out there, not just NoSQL, obviously, but there was a whole wave of innovation there. And if you kind of take a step back and figure out how we got here, well, it used to be that you had Oracle and you had IBM and you had Microsoft and you had a few other, Sybase was out there in terms of providing database technology. I actually remember interviewing Dr. Michael Stonebreaker way back in 2005, and he was talking about one size does not fit all, and that's back when Vertica was brand new. Now, of course, they've been bounced around a little bit, but it's still a very powerful database out there. But the point is, you had this absolute revolution in database technologies. Think about MariaDB, for example. You've got Redis Labs. You've got MongoDB. I use a number of these, and that's such an important evolution in the management of assets, of information assets, that we had this explosion of innovation. But guess what? Now you either have to have someone who knows how to connect to Mongo, who knows the intricacies of that platform, of MySQL, of MariaDB, which of course forked off there. Monty Vidanius, I interviewed him last year as well. All these different databases and systems have their own idiosyncrasies, their own little quirks you have to watch out for. And until now, with Magnitude Gateway, I haven't seen anyone really attack that problem strategically to be able to provide access to all these different systems. Because just if you do the math on the hours in the day that are required to set this stuff up, well, DBAs know all about that stuff. It's what they've done for years. But now, if you can have this one marshaling area for connectivity and for permissions and so forth, and Craig, I'll throw this out to you, think about the amount of time and effort that your developers, that your database administrators, that your IT folks can now focus on your business, on satisfying business users, not just connectivity. That needs to be kind of like the dial tone, right? So to me, the big play here is the fact that organizations don't have to have 5 to 7 people trying to manage all these spaghetti, if you will, connections to different databases. Now they can marshal those resources, have maybe 2 or 3 people doing that, and the other folks can be working with the business. But Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, where do you want to spend your resources, and where is your what are your areas of expertise, right? And so with Simba's connectivity solutions, that's what we do every day, is worry about how best to connect to data. We worry about our partners that are using our solutions and figuring out what is it they need to integrate data access into their solutions. So when they're coming to us, for example, I mentioned earlier that we have analytic vendors, for example, that embed our solutions in their product. And they come to us not because they don't have development resources, some of them are larger than us, it's because they don't want to focus their resources on that part of the problem. They want to focus their resources on what their core competencies are, which might be visualization or it might be ETL, for example. And I think the same thing applies to in sort of the enterprise with an IT department. It's working your best to add value with your limited resources, and we certainly know that IT always has those constraints to worry about. So if that's something that we can take off their plate, then all the better.
Right. And, I'm going to throw one over to Tony here. As I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about the future of work and the new skill set that people require and how all that stuff is changing, there is a common theme we talk about on our various programs, including DM Radio, which is that the traditional IT person can now start looking to the cloud as where their time and attention should be spent, because the different cloud vendors absolutely have a tremendous amount of information you need to absorb to use them effectively, like Amazon versus Microsoft Azure versus Rackspace versus Heroku and all these different players out there. And I think the same thing holds true now for data connectivity. So instead of trying to learn everything you need to know about Mongo and MariaDB and Redis Labs and MySQL and all these other technologies, if you can focus on understanding what this kind of a platform does, that's probably going to be a better use of your time. And one of the attendees is commenting that there are other companies out there. There are data platform companies. If you think about it, Cloudera and Hortonworks and MapR were all theoretically going to be moving in that direction. Then, of course, that market consolidated dramatically, and now Cloudera and Hortonworks are one company. So that vision, I think, was focused on the big data side of the equation, which is fine, but at the end of the day, it has to be connected to the small data side of the equation too. But just generally speaking, Tony, I see an analogy here between focused on DBA-style activities of old versus information connectivity activities of the present and future, kind of analogous to the cloud. But what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And yes, I didn't mean to imply that there are no other companies doing what we're doing. Certainly there are some. It is again it's a lot of stuff to keep up with, to continue to keep up to date with all the data sources that are out there. Sort of to Craig's point, and to somewhat answer your question, one of the things Craig said was that a lot of our customers are software vendors. Now, do they have the capability to create this technology? Sure. They're software vendors. But the fact of the matter is that they want to spend their time and energy doing other things and concentrating on what is their core competency. And the same is true in the enterprise and IT today. If you can take some of the grunt work away, and it's one of the things you were talking about, Eric, at the very start, the way that the expectations of people and what people are working on is changing over time. If you can take some of the grunt work away and automate some of it, of the things that are consuming a lot of time and unnecessary energy in the IT community, you could free them up to do other things and to actually help move the business forward in a fashion rather than having to spend all day kind of slogging over less than glamorous work. So yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, what you said earlier and what Craig said is exactly right, is let's get an environment where people can concentrate on the thing that will have the most impact in moving their business forward. And some of these other things, maybe we won't have to have IT spending so much time on it. So yeah, I think that answered the question.
Yeah, things are changing very, very rapidly. There's no doubt about that. Here's a technical question, but an important one. I'll throw over to Craig. What are the system requirements to use and deploy Magnitude's unified application management solutions? What do you have to have in-house to be able to run this stuff?
So that's unfortunately not an easy question to answer. So it depends on the solution that you're deploying, whether it's one of our solutions that's specific to the SAP ecosphere, or if it's a solution related to our product information management solutions. So there's a suite of applications that we offer, and each of them will have different requirements depending on what particular sources they're targeting.
Okay, no, that's something else they can follow up on too. And there are a lot of other technologies that are doing similar things, but what I find interesting about your approach is just how foundational it is. So we've got some folks asking, which ETL tools use Simba, JDBC, ODBC, API connectivity, et cetera. I think we can find a lot of that stuff on the website, and I can forward your questions, folks, to the presenters today so they can get back to you. But again, the key here, to your point, Tony, is to free up your team. This is not a new story. It's an old story with a new twist, I suppose. But to me, that whole conversation around the future of work is a bit of a clarion call, because guess what? Like, so many jobs are going to be augmented or even obviated, and really somewhat crazy stuff, like voice-activated things, right? Even job interviews, like I was saying earlier, it's amazing how much information can be gleaned from data that lives everywhere. The question, the magic for your business model is going to be piecing together the right components to get to market. So I guess, Craig, I'll throw it over to you just to comment on that. Again, business models are changing. A lot of what's happening in the information space is automation, and I think it's important for companies to stay on top of that, to give yourself the free time to be strategic, right? If you're always chasing your tail, then you're in reactive mode. And I think with this vision, with what you guys are talking about, you can enable companies to kind of tackle some of those basic, get the data out the door and back in the door type issues to where they could be strategic again. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, so I think having a sort of a data connectivity platform in place lets us add services that can address some of those needs. I think there's also a lot of interesting changes happening around sort of just the types of data that people want to access. So, you talked about automation and et cetera. So, we're starting to worry about data that is not necessarily at rest all the time. We have to worry about data that's streaming data, for example. So, yeah, I think that having, if we can centralize the data access in one place so that we understand what's coming in, we can actually do a lot of things that are interesting around provisioning of that data. We can do a lot of things that are interesting around making sure that we're predictive about the types of things that people are going to be accessing. So, but the key thing is to make sure that we have sort of a view of a centralized view of where that's all happening.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to one final comment I'll throw out here as the hour is expiring. Governance, right? If you can't see what's happening, you sure can't govern what's happening. And so I see this also playing into data governance, information governance, and those are going to be increasingly important technologies as time goes by, to our point about GDPR and CCPA. And with that, I'll hand it back to Shannon. Thanks to our friends from Magnitude. Thanks to all of you for your time and attention and good questions. Shannon, take us out.
Eric, thank you so much. And again, thank you to Craig and Tony and to all of you for a great presentation today. And thanks to our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do and all the questions coming in. Just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Friday for this webinar with links to the slides, links to the recording, and thanks to Magnitude for today's sponsorship. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.